Hey everybody, this is Chef Cynthia with Soul Good and Chef Cynthia Eats. I am coming to you today to talk about climate change, sustainability practices in business as well as at home, and the differences between American agriculture and France and the EU. I have a special guest with me today, Monisha Clifton, who is a scholar with Dallas College Culinary Pastry and Hospitality School here in Dallas, Texas, who recently had the opportunity to participate in a very special international studying program on sustainability in businesses. And she traveled to France to study culture, the society, agriculture, and sustainability practices that the government is enacting or has enacted over in that country. And I was fascinated by what she was able to experience and see and observe and eat, most important. And I wanted to bring her to the table to talk about her experiences. So thank you so much, Monisha, for joining me today. Tell me a little bit
Thank
about
you.
yourself.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so my name is Monisha, and as Chef Cynthia mentioned, I am a student in the culinary arts program at Dallas College. I also run a bakery called Mo's Delights, and as a part of my culinary school curriculum, I'm currently doing a externship or internship with So Good. So I've been able to do my co-op and also my practicum with So Good, which has been an exciting opportunity. And I have an awesome toddler that keeps me busy outside of baking. And yeah, that's pretty much Monisha in a nutshell. Baking mama.
I love it. And so let's get into the topic of your travel to
Hmm.
France. You just recently returned, and
Hmm.
you all had a program. You participated in a program that was focused on sustainability in business. Tell me a little bit about that project and what your goal was in that project.
Sure. So the Business Sustainability Boot Camp offered this summer was actually not the program I initially signed up for. So last summer, about five culinary students from Dallas College was given, including myself, we were given the opportunity to apply for a food sustainability boot camp that was offered by one of the colleges in France in partnership with the French Embassy. Well, some logistical things happened and the program ended up being canceled. But what they did was grandfathered our application into the application process this year, well, this summer. And what initially was a food sustainability program that we were going to participate in ended up being a business or a sustainable business boot camp where we learned more than just about the food supply chain, but how any type of business could start incorporating what are called CSR goals, which stands for corporate social responsibility.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And what were maybe the top one or two things that you learned as it relates to sustainability practices that businesses could incorporate into their business?
So, one of the key things that I learned or realized was that sustainability or having a sustainable business is not a destination. It's not a thing where you can just say, oh, our business is sustainable. Sustainability is more of a spectrum. And so, as time progresses and as technology advances, or as we go backwards to more primitive ways that are better for society, we see there's always going to be things that we can do more. Now, granted, everybody is not Alicia Silverstone. Hey, Alicia, where you can, buy a house at 19 and in your current state have like a house that filters water that goes into the irrigation system in your garden. That everybody's not able to do that, but what you can do in your life and also in your business is create what's called a strategy which is over a period of time, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 15 years, incorporate practices that can decrease the amount of environmental impact your product or service is putting on the environment, or lower your carbon footprint. So that was the biggest thing that I learned, that it's more so of a spectrum and a journey than it is like a destination and just having a stamp, we are sustainable.
That's interesting because what you also found in France is that the government there is more intentional in the incorporation of sustainability practices in everyday life of their citizens and businesses versus the kind of hands off, stand back approach that America has when it comes to sustainability practices. And so let's talk about some of the things that you observed in France that you saw that was very intentional in that country. I believe you received a gift from the Rand School of Business when you arrived. That was very interesting. What was that gift?
So when we arrived on campus for orientation, we received a bento box along with this eating tool. It was a spoon on one end, a fork on the other end, and on one side of the fork were ridges to where you can use it as a knife. And we were encouraged to either eat lunch on campus, pack our lunch, and once we're done with our lunch, pack away the leftovers and take them home and eat them later. And so the goal was to really to not just reduce food waste from under consumption, like not eating all of your meal, but also reduce the waste that's used in paper products, just throwing away plates and napkins after one use. As our instructor explained it, recycling is the last part of um, of the sustainability chain when we think about consumerism. Reduction should be number one, reusing should be number two, and then recycling. So just a gift like that would it really spoke to the intentionality of not just the program but the community, the society, because this was a normal thing to see people go to lunch and pull out a bento box or pull out a glass reusable container that was filled with their lunch or their meal for the day. And also glass bottles, reusable metal bottles or canteens. That was very normal to see over there as well.
Interesting. There's another fact that you saw or observed there, and that is more physical activity among citizens there, riding bicycles, taking public transportation, walking to and fro business and home versus the use of automobiles. So that was very
Correct.
shocking. Hmm.
It was more common to see people walk to their destinations or even the store, ride a bike. I saw a few people on scooters. Many people use public transportation. It was more common to see folks walking and riding bicycles than it was driving cars. And I'd also have to say, built into their infrastructure, the infrastructure of the city. We were in Rennes at the Rennes School of Business. So, built into the infrastructure of Rennes, just about every street had a bike path and a walking path. So, and it was labeled, this is the walking. So the sidewalk was wide and it was a striped area for walking and a striped area for bicycling. And then you had the street for cars, which mainly, like I said, a lot of people took public transportation. But it was very common to see families on bikes, especially men riding bikes with their children in a child seat in the back. It was common to see people walking to the grocery store. Now there are huge supermarkets, but it's more common to see a store, a smaller grocery store every 1 to 2 miles because people were walking and getting groceries for the next few days or their essentials for the week versus driving 7 to 10 miles to a large grocery store and buying bags and bags and bags of groceries, which we think about it ends up leading us to having more food waste versus if I go to walk to the grocery store every 2 to 3 days to get food for a meal that I might eat today, have leftovers tomorrow, I'm less likely to waste food than I am to buy food for the next 2 or 3 weeks and then pick up that item. Oh, this looks good. Let me try it. And I don't really try it. It's just in the back of my pantry for a month. I know that's how I am. And so the just built into the infrastructure of the city were ways that people that promoted sustainability.
Very good to know. And I wish we had more of that. I think in certain communities that is designed that way in the US. And then the majority, especially in your urban communities and in your rural communities, that's not the case. Suburbia, that may be easier. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because they we walked to school every day. And on our path to school, there were different options on how to walk to school. So you had the sidewalk that on the on the other side of the sidewalk was the bike path. So you could walk on the sidewalk, you can ride your bike. There was also across the street, like on the other side of the street, a more pebbled path, and there were trees over it. So you can take the pebbled path, or you could take the uncovered cement path, and then the paths past just they weren't parks, but just green spaces where people could sit and eat, and you could see how intentional it was to just have spaces where people could sit and rest and carry on with the walk. Begin to think about certain parts of the neighborhoods that you drive down. There's no sidewalk, none of too much and like urban areas will be there's parts of the person house where you drive through and it was designed just cars. Like absolutely no sidewalk. So if you are shopping, you're running in and so it was really interesting about the communities that I had frequented in the state versus the community that we were going to school in, just comparing how the streets were designed for business and seeing where the business are.
Okay. I'm going to, can you hear me, Monisha?
Yes, I hear you.
So I'm getting a drag, so I'm hoping that the end result doesn't have that same drag because it stopped. So I can't hear. Okay, hold on.
This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, Monisha, so we
So
were, oh, go ahead.
yeah, so there were a number of green spaces built into or alongside the path, which encourages you to stop, take a rest, and keep walking. So I and at one point during my trip, I began to think about different communities here in Dallas, and not just urban communities, but some of the more wealthier communities as well. And there are particular neighborhoods in Dallas where there's absolutely no sidewalk. The infrastructure is designed only for folks who are commuting in a car. And if you don't have a car and you happen to be walking, you're walking on the street where cars are. So it was really, really intriguing to see how the city was designed to keep um, people who are walking separate from people who are on a bicycle, which are both separate from folks who are driving or taking public transportation.
Very interesting. And so, what that tells me is that we have to have intentional design and engineering that includes sustainable practices such as allowing pedestrians to be able to walk from point A to point B safely, one, and design it that way. Design where we have more green spaces for people to enjoy, to eat, to rest, and continue their journey, and to be intentional in how companies make sustainable practices a part of everyday life. But we don't necessarily do that here in the US, and we don't do it well for many different reasons, political and so forth. And some people just don't believe there's a connection between climate change and sustainable practices and agriculture, whereas science and research shows that there is. And so in France and in the EU, they are essentially saying, yes, we believe this, and being very intentional in how they incorporate it into everyday life. I like
Correct,
that.
correct. And
So let's
something that our instructors really try to drive home is understanding that when you are, whether you choose to be a business consultant or run your own business, just understanding how to not label people as the bad guy. So there are so many companies who have the potential to do more or be more sustainable. But if or I'll just take my business as example. Moser Lights has the potential to be more sustainable. But when I'm introduced to business practices that I can incorporate, I shouldn't view myself as, oh, I'm just a bad person. I've been doing so much wrong. No, now that I'm aware, it's time for me to now take steps to build a strategy to become more sustainable. And so, something that I noticed that as my classmates and I, we did, me included, as soon as we begin to kind of just wrap our mind around what it means to move towards more sustainable living, or operating our businesses in a more sustainable way, we begin to just name companies left and right that's just doing it all wrong. I mean, they're just doing it all wrong. And our professor instructed us to, I mean, or encouraged us to remember what they contribute to society really provides a lot of convenience for how we live.
mm,
So, what we need to do is, instead of labeling certain companies as bad people, come up with a strategy or offer yourself as a consultant and say, hey, this is how you contribute to society, and this is how it's damaging the environment. Now, what you produce is essential, but excuse me, how you hire your people, um, the the amount of labor that you put your people under, and um, what you do with your waste from the products that you produce, that needs to be tightened up because it's killing the world. And so, really challenging people, not just companies, but challenging people to be more responsible, versus just labeling everybody as bad is how we're going to get there. That's what we were encouraged to do.
I like that. And I think that is important. You probably will get less pushback from corporations who don't care if it doesn't impact the bottom line. If it doesn't have a
Correct.
significant impact on saving and increasing profitability and gross margins, they are not going to pay attention to it, most likely in this country in comparison to others. I was reading prior to chatting with you about agriculture and how America incorporates more genetically modified organisms into agriculture because of efficiency and the ability to double production, which all relates to capitalism in comparison to France and other EU countries. And so what you have is those countries may produce less than America because they are not using or allowing GMO and other banned substances in their production or in agriculture like we are today. But you have to
Mhm.
look at the end cost, in my personal opinion. If you have more sick humans in this country because of that increased efficiency and more production to feed more humans, is it better? It's my
Right. It's and to know that GMOs are just straight up banned in other countries, like they just don't allow it. You have to really ask yourself the question, what who's gaining and why? Who's gaining and why? And when we tie in health, that opens up a huge conversation about how all of this, yeah, just how all of this is connected. Because when we think about GMOs and modifying produce to withstand herbicides and pesticides and climate, uh, I'm going to use the word loosely, better, we have to think about what are we doing to the nutritional value and also the molecular components of these foods is going into the body. And something that is not discussed as prevalent as type 2 diabetes and hypertension and high cholesterol is just the endocrine system as a whole. Like, we
Yeah,
have this entire system in our body that produces different hormones, and each one of these hormones have a job. Each one of these hormones do a certain thing. Like, we see something that scares us, and our body literally releases a hormone that triggers us to either fight or flight. That's not fight or flight. And I'm talking about cortisol. That's just one of them. But when we begin to eat things that have been genetically changed, it begins to either speed up or slow down something that was, excuse me, speed up or slow down something that was designed to function or flow at a certain pace. And it's being altered. And so when we think about sustainability, um, how we are overproducing crops, we have to think about how that plays a role in the health of, yeah, in the health of humans. And then when we think of the ecosystem, we design a crop to withstand certain um, climates. Basically, we're removing from that plant its ability to do what it was designed to do. Like, it gets really scary when you start thinking about it on a small scale, but then how it affects, like, the, yeah, just it's really scary. But we talked about that on a small, just like the food supply chain. We talked about that as a small widget or cog in this entire wheel of the excuse me,
hmm
of the world that we function in, that can be more sustainable.
hmm So, the last thing I want to touch on really quickly was the food and your experience with the open market, seeing the produce that is grown without being GMO. Because we have this conception or perception, shall I say, in the US that organically grown foods, or however people define that, are smaller and yield less than your genetically modified foods that are larger. But you and I both know if you are a farmer, if you're a gardener, you can tell the difference in the flavor, the quality, the consistency, as well as the shelf life of organic produce that's grown in your backyard in comparison to what you buy in the store. That's the truth. That's not a lie. There is a difference. It may be small, but for those of us who care, it's large enough. The flavor is different, the quality is different, but you observed something different in France. You saw in the open market produce that was larger and much more flavorful. Tell me about that experience.
Sure. And as I expound on that, something that I'd like to say is that when it comes to France or the area of France where we were in, which is Brittany, there's a strong push to buy local. So even when you bought packaged products in the grocery store, you could see that a lot of, I'm not going to say most, but a lot of the products were made in Brittany. So it wasn't a lot of imports from all over the world. uh, the wine, the cheese, the nuts, the produce, you may see a tag where it's been produced in Brittany, in the country or in the region that you're in, which means shorter travel time. It means that in a lot of things that I've seen before or learned about here in the States where things are sprayed so that they can keep their kind of sheen or look for longer travel times. We know that that has been alleviated. And then the economics of buying local or buying within the region means that the dollar is being circulated in the region versus the dollar being sent out. Is just a beautiful thing to experience. And so, when we think about a food truck festival or a line of food trucks here in the States, we think of like maybe a sandwich truck and a hot dog truck and a burger truck and a taco truck. A lot of fast foods are easy, fast casual foods reduced down to a fast food setup. But when I walked into the square one day near our school, and the different trucks were actually selling produce and selling fresh items. So there was a truck selling produce, vegetables, and fruit. There was a truck that sold nuts and cheese. There was another truck that it, the side of it looked like an ice chest, but they were selling all types of seafood, mussels, and cake. I mean, it was just everything, like all types of seafood on this food truck. Then there was another one that sold all types of sausages. And so the concept of a food truck park was more so a mobile farmers market, which
Oh,
was I just had never seen that before. It was literally a mobile farmers market. Shopping in the grocery store, we were not. So the area that we were in was it was a neighborhood. It was a it, wa- it wa- I wouldn't say that it was a well-to-do. It was working class. I'll say it like that. So we were in a working class neighborhood, and the grocery store, in my opinion, was the equivalent of Whole Foods. But this was a working class community. Now, just living where I live, Whole Foods are not in working class communities here in Dallas. So to see that that's the caliber of produce that is offered in working class communities, I was amazed. I was amazed. And it was clear that people bought produce in bulk because, um, yeah, bought fresh produce in bulk, and the freezer space for processed meals was very small. They had them, but it wasn't in 2 or 3 rows like we see in supermarket. Well, I see in supermarkets here. It was the produce and grocery shopping experience was much different.
that's fascinating to me. It makes me extraordinarily excited as well because I would love to incorporate a practice in my own home, whereas I reduce the amount of items that are in my freezer and processed items, which is where we're going towards in Soul Good with our new menu, less processed, more whole foods, which I'm extremely excited about. But I want to do it at home as well. And plus, return to gardening and growing most of my produce
Hmm.
that I consume in my own backyard, which is sustainable. It's also healthier and much healthier for your mental health as well, as science is showing us. Growing your own foods and tending to your garden or raising plants can tend to be much more healthy for you mentally. And so these are just small things that people can incorporate into their daily lives, really become intentional at home as well as at work. And this experience that you had in France proves that it can be done because they're doing it in Europe and successfully, I might add. And I would have to look at the research and the data to determine or to see whether or not they have a healthier society than we do here in the US as well. So I'm curious about that and probably will study that more. Um, so I want to say thank you so much. This has been so helpful. For those of you who are watching this, we will post this also on the Soul Good blog at eatsoulgood.com. We will have pictures of Monisha in the open air market standing near the produce and have a write up of the study that she did or the experience that she had over in France. And so thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it, Monisha.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Alrighty. Thank you all. Visit eatsoulgood.com for more.